Hello, it's Dawn Michelle. Welcome back to my channel.
Hello.
Today I'm back. We're just rolling with that. Today I'm back with, my very good friend Lisa Pepez for our Tarot in Practice series.
Yep.
And we are on episode number
3.
3? Yeah, 3.
Yep.
So, and today we're talking about deck collections.
Fun.
That's always a fun one.
Can't wait.
So what we were just discussing before we started the video was let's just rip the Band-Aid off. How many decks do you have?
Okay, so I just consulted my spreadsheet so I can answer this fairly honestly. I think I have in the ballpark of 250 total. That's Tarot, Oracle, Lenormand, playing card, rune, etc.
I have 440.
Oh, you're not to 500 yet. Get cracking.
Not 500 yet. That is there's a few missing because I have some decks for review and stuff that aren't in my list. My spreadsheet's not 100% up to date, but I'm getting to that 450 mark. So I don't know why I want to hit 500. I just do. It's
kind of it's like if you're playing like Mario or something like on the Nintendo and you just want to get to the end and get the flag at the highest point and pull it down. So am I dating myself? That's
totally I'm following that reference. It's all good. Yeah. I don't know, 500. I'm running out of space though. So I feel like 500 is probably going to max out the space that I have. I mean, I had to add bookshelves behind me to make more room. I'm totally cool with that. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
And I did mention to Kevin that we could put some more bookshelves in the living room and some of my books could go in there to make more room for decks in here. So.
I like how you think. Good plan.
I'm going to maximize the space I have.
Yes.
So yeah, that's where we're at. Because do you get that question a lot? How many decks do you have?
Yeah, I'd say I get it pretty regularly. I mean, I hang mine on the wall, which is great, but also there's limited wall space and I live in an apartment. So I'm kind of space limited as well as just generally limited. But yeah, I feel like I get that question a lot. And usually my answer is the same. I feel like my collection's kind of, it's just been.
Yeah, I feel like you've been kind of at that even keel mark. I may, when I hit my 500, I may at that point go through and look at okay, so are these all decks that I actually do want to keep? But because there's probably that's stuff that sometimes comes in for review, and if it's in my house, it's in my spreadsheet. It doesn't matter how it came to me, or if I'm using it.
I don't add mine to my list if they're in purgatory / getting ready to be rehomed, and I don't add them to my list until I do my recent deck roundup video. Then I'll put them in my list. So there might be a few things kicking around here or there, but it's most of the things that go into purgatory never come back out, if I'm being completely honest. So usually I just consider them out until and then if I put them back in, I'll put them back in my spreadsheet. But yeah. I love that we both have spreadsheets for our collection. Yes. Those makes me really happy.
Okay, so is your spreadsheet one tarot, one oracle page?
Yeah, I have a tarot, an oracle, a Lenormand, / Kipper, and an other for rune, playing card, whatever other stuff. Yeah.
So just because now we're on to spreadsheets, what data do you track in your spreadsheet?
Oh, okay. So everything but price. We don't track prices. We don't want to track prices. But I do track the name, whether it's indie, mass market, or out of print, or indie now mass market. I track the author name, the artist name, the whether or not what style, what system the deck is based on. So RWS, Thoth, Marseille, or Pip. And then whether or not it has scenic, minor arcana or not. I track that. And I track when it came in, just the month and the year. So I know how long I've had it. And then I usually have a notes field for any extra stuff. For a long time, because I was working on that cardstock video, I technically still have this data, but I hid it in the spreadsheet because it's overwhelming to look at. I had all of the cardstock details when I did that big project and reached out to everybody. So I had GSM, what kind of core it had, what kind of coating it had, what the printer was, if I knew, all of that. I had that for a while, but I don't try to keep up with that because that's obnoxious.
That's a lot of data. Yeah.
A lot of data. What about you? What do you keep track of?
Mine's more pared down than that. I have obviously the deck name and I keep them in order of purchase date. So they're not alphabetical.
Mine are alphabetical.
I do have a secondary copy that I dump it in and then re-alphabetize it. So I do have an alphabetical list, but my main tab for each of I just have mine in tarot and oracle is just anything that isn't tarot, basically.
Oh, that's simpler.
I have the name of the deck. I have whether it's indie, out of print, or mass market. I have the date I bought it. I have the price I paid for it, because I do have price. And man, let me tell you, hitting that total button is like,
oh, that's why I don't do it. I would cry and Peggy would divorce me.
I don't have it like, I don't have it totaled, like keep it totaled the rest of the time. But I have hit that total button occasionally, and I'm like, wow. But see, I can always play the it's not a motorcycle card, so it's fine, right?
Yeah,
My house.
that's hard to pull. I mean,
I'm good.
yeah.
And then I also have, if I've started in the last like year or so, if I've modified it, I have a column for what I did to it and like what colors I use, because I get that all the time. And
Oh, I
like,
have that too. I have a modification column, but not what colors I use. That's smart.
yeah,
That's
because
smart.
I get lots of questions like, well, you can see I used a tombow or whatever. I'll mention I used a tombow, and somebody will ask what one, and I'm like, I don't know. I edged it like a month ago, so I started writing them down
That's
so I
so
can
smart.
hopefully answer that question.
Yeah.
I think that's it, and I keep it by date, so it's like always the first deck I bought down to the
Oldest?
down to the newest is on the bottom. So
Oh, the newest is on the bottom.
anything new, I just plug into the bottom of the list to just keep it going. But yeah, I don't keep it total the rest of the time. That does come in handy though, occasionally when I've had like for like if I'm reselling something, because I can look and see how much I paid for it. It's not so much a big deal with like mass market, but for like indie decks, or if I bought something out of print, then I can
Yeah.
look back and see, okay, I paid X amount for this. So, that can sometimes determine what I'm going to ask for it or something. So occasionally that's come in handy. Although I don't really pay any attention to the total column
That's
or
good.
the numbers. I don't pay any attention to the numbers. It's just looking at how many decks and when I bought them and that kind of thing. So yeah,
Yeah.
totally love having spreadsheets. There's lots of people that keep spreadsheets to organize their deck collection.
Yeah. And there's some people that use that Libib. I know Dustin puts his, I think, in Libib and has his whole library in there. I'd be interested to hear how people organize or keep track of what they've got. I think that'd be a fun thing to comment on, because I'd be curious to see what systems people use, because I love that stuff.
I'm always just spreadsheets. I'm basic.
Yeah, I know. Spreadsheets are easy.
I'm basic.
Yeah.
All right, so now that we've kind of talked about like the nitty-gritty stuff, should we talk about like kind of the overarching, what does like having a collection mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean to collect something? How does it apply to tarot, type of a thing?
It's funny because when I think of, for a long time, I've struggled with the word off and on, because to me, I guess for a long time, I thought of collections the way I thought of my mom's like decorative spoon collection, which is where you just have a whole bunch of something and it's there like for display, if that makes any sense. So like it's a collectible. My grandma collected Precious Moments figurines, or like, so when I would think of collections, I would think of these untouchable objects, right? That aren't tools, aren't used. They're just things that are there and that you acquire and you appreciate to look at, right? So for a long time, I was like, well, I'm not a collector. And I still sometimes catch myself saying that. Well, I don't collect because I like to use what I have. But in truth, you can collect anything. Like, and Peggy's kind of the one who kind of not called me on that, but yeah, I guess kind of called me on that. She's like, well, you collect, you've collected fountain pens, you've collected this, you've collected that. And it's like, yeah, I guess you're right. And just because I'm using something doesn't mean I'm not actually collecting it. Yeah, I think collecting is, in a broad sense, you can look at it in that display sense. But I think for me now, I kind of just understand collecting to amassing a lot of something or many of something in the same category of some things. Like some people might collect DVDs or books or I don't know, yoga mats. Just depends like what you're into. Squishimals. I'm just trying to think of all the different things, but yeah,
Motorcycles.
Motorcycles, exactly. Motorcycle parts.
Some people have really big collections of really big things.
Yeah, cars. Yeah.
Cars, yeah.
Yeah.
I think of collection as kind of like, I tend to use, I think that word a little bit in terms of tarot synonymously with like curating a selection of tools. So like my collection is like a curated gathering of tools that I use for certain things. So like I have a collection of crystal skulls too. Some of them are purely decorative and some of them I actually use. Like, dude, I got one in my hand because sometimes they're just fidget things. Um, but it's like there's certain things I look for, and I think there's like most things in life, it's about the intention. Like it,
Yeah.
I feel like we've had this conversation around intention with in pretty much I think every discussion we've had so far, because it's such a
Yep.
key part of I think any doing anything with purpose. It's all about
Yeah.
the intention. I do have decks that are strictly for like you said, like display purposes. Like they're a
Mhm.
collector's item to me, or and it's not necessarily like because they're worth a lot or something like that. It's because they have sentimental value to me. So I have
Yeah.
a couple of decks. Like one comes to mind is the Crystal Unicorn Tarot. I bought that deck on Ash's 16th birthday because Ash had a unicorn party and we did readings with the Crystal Unicorn Tarot. I've
I
not
love
used
that.
that deck since. I will never get rid of it because
Yeah.
it's now a collectible for me. Um,
Yeah, you now have it because you just wanna have it and keep it.
yeah, it's like it's
Yeah.
attached to that memory. So it's like the same with like the Legacy of the Divine. I don't ever use that deck anymore, but it was the first deck that I bought for myself. So I still
Yeah.
have it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got some too that I just there was one that I for a long time I struggled with this concept of like I don't want to have something just to have it, but there have been a few exceptions I've decided to make for myself of
Mhm.
that rule, right? Decks that I put in purgatory, but I just couldn't bear to part with, like the Taroko de Corda de Taroki,
Yep.
which
Mhm.
there's something about that deck. I've used it maybe 5 times the entire time I've had it, but I
Mhm.
put that thing in purgatory and was prepared to sell it. I was like, "I'm never gonna use this thing, but it's so pretty." And then I was like, "You know what? I just like having it. I just
Mhm.
like having it." So I pulled it back out,
Mhm.
put it on my shelf, and every once in a while I'll get it out and I'll literally just play with the
Look,
cards because I like the card stock. It's just a thing. And there's been, I think, a couple of others like that that I like. I don't really use the Osho Zen Tarot the way that I did before. Rarely, if ever, do I reach for it, but I would never get rid of it because it's just a part of my tarot story.
yeah.
Um, and there's been a few like that, but for me, the vast majority are ones that I feel like I want to use what I have.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah, same. I have I rotate my decks out. Well, I have like my seasonal baskets, and those decks don't really change that often. Occasionally a new one will get put in. But they've been pretty consistent for the last few years. But I also have like several like containers in my closet that have decks that are just not in use right now. So they don't really maybe resonate with a particular seasonal energy, or they're just decks that maybe I only use in a particular season, so they kind of hang out in like storage. So I have
yeah,
storage, and then I do have purgatory, but I don't do purgatory as much as I used to. I'm more now in the I store it. Unless
yeah,
I get a deck and I'm just like, oh man, this is never gonna be for me. And then it goes
yeah,
into purgatory.
yeah.
There was that portal oracle that I just like it
Didn't
gave me
work out. Hey.
anxiety. So it
Oh,
was
oh, was that the one with the dots or the holes or something? What's that
no,
thing?
but there was that one too.
Oh,
And
okay.
I don't know, it's like the oracle of portals or something like that. It's portals. I should love it. That's like right up my alley. But
Yeah,
there was a thing, it gave me anxiety, so it went directly into purgatory. But unless it's an instance like that, the rest of the time it just goes into storage, because if I put stuff in purgatory and I don't like give it a really long time, like I know you let yours sit for a really long time. If I
yeah,
don't give it enough time and I rehome things too quickly, I have rebought several decks that I
yeah,
have done the binge and purge thing. And that's
yeah.
like that's where it starts to get unhealthy for me, is when I start engaging in that binge and purge activity. So,
Which just to define that, that's when you bring a whole bunch of stuff in and then you feel like you have to let a whole lot of stuff go, or
mhm.
like you bring the same things in and let them go again. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, so some people do the one in, one out thing, and I think that is a really good, like, rule of thumb if you are comfortable with that, and if you have, like, a certain number or a certain, like, amount of space that you're trying to contain your collection to. But I think the binging and purging is when you do it in an unhealthy way. Like, you buy
Mhm.
a lot of decks, and then you get rid of a lot of decks, or you immediately turn around and get rid of those decks you just bought because you feel, like,
Mhm.
now guilty. It's a whole, like, um I did some research on it when that whole thing happened in the community, and I kind of, like, fell victim to it myself. Um,
Yeah.
because I bought a lot of decks and I put a lot of decks out, and then I ended up repurchasing the vast majority of them. But it's like you get the kind of hit of, I got the new thing, but then you either realize that you have something similar, or like it just doesn't work for you in the immediate 5 seconds that you thought it was going to work for you. So then you go into the pain spiral of, I shouldn't have bought this. I shouldn't have done this, you know.
And then you're feeling bad. So then you're like trying to undo.
So then you try to undo. Yeah.
Yep.
It's like a whole thing. I've
Yep.
also learned over the years that just because a deck doesn't work for me the first 5 minutes I have it in my hands doesn't mean that it won't work for me later on. So
Yeah.
that's also a big thing too, which is why I put a lot of things in storage, because like it's not working for me right now. So I put it away. And
I now have a spot for like storagey kind of things where like if I have, there's a couple of decks where I don't think I'm probably going to ever get rid of them, but I just don't see them in my active practice. So now I have a sort of storage category for myself, but it's very few things, or it's things where I'm putting them away until I have time to really, really bond with them. Like I know they're going to take a study, or they're going to take a deep dive to really get to know, or things where I might have multiple copies. Like I have the Light Seers mini, so my Light Seers full size will go into storage, but I don't need to get rid of it. Like I like the copy that I have, but I'm probably just going to gravitate towards using the mini. So I don't need my prime wall space taken up by something that I have a duplicate of, that kind of thing. So like, or two different shadow Moonchild tarots, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, having a storage category is, I think, helpful for that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I think Purgatory is helpful too, because it's a good place to put something while you're considering where it's going to go, if it's going to stay with you or if it's going to move on. And like, there's, in my opinion, because I can only speak from mommy plays, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with getting rid of decks that don't work for you either. Like just because, you know, just because you put money into it doesn't mean that you're obligated to keep it. Like, it's like when you buy something because you're like, oh, in the grocery store, and you're like, oh, this might be good. And then you get it home and you're like, ooh, that's disgusting.
Yeah.
Just like you throw it away. That's totally cool. I mean, you don't have to throw your tarot decks away, but
No.
you know, like,
well, I feel like there's a part of the process too where the value you get out of a deck isn't, for me anyways, there's been a lot of experiences I've had where the value I've gotten out of it isn't having it and using it for years and years. It's been having it, getting to know it, learning the perspective it had to offer, but then maybe it doesn't work out as an active tool, and so it moves back out again. But that doesn't mean that I didn't have value or didn't get value from it while it was with me. Do you know what I mean? So I think letting go of the like guilt over, I bought this thing, but it didn't work out, so I'm letting it go. I don't know. For me, that's why I always take at least some time with every deck, because I won't know until I've worked with it. So that really helps too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like Purgatory for sort of when I'm pretty sure something's going to go, but I just don't want to rush, because I have repurchased decks. I've done what you've done. Just, I would say it's way less frequent, but it's absolutely happened. In fact, I think I did a whole video about these decks came back? I feel like I had a plan to do one. I don't
did, and I think I did a VR to it.
Because I have
so many too.
Okay, good. Yeah, because there was some
years ago, but yeah.
Yeah, there's decks that like I let go. And the sad thing is there's decks I let go of like 15 years ago when I was like, oh, it's fine. I only need like 4 or 5 decks or whatever. And some of those I still wish I had. So, I mean, now I try to be like you, but I try to take things slow and like not be in a rush to let them go.
Yeah. Yeah. So when did you first start like collecting, gathering more than, you know, I guess more than a handful of decks? Like how do you define a collection? For somebody it's 5, it's 500. So
I think I really have always, but the thing is that I think back in like the early 2000s, I had like late 90s, early 2000s, I probably had 20 or so decks, maybe, which back then was quite a lot.
That was
and then I went through a break with tarot, and during that break I pared my collection down to like maybe 5 or 6 because I wasn't really working with decks that much, and so I let a bunch go, some of which I now definitely regret. But even I feel like in like 2004, 20 decks is a lot of tarot decks. You know what I mean? So I feel like I started collecting really kind of from the beginning. You get the one, you learn it, and then you want another one. Like, I don't know, maybe I just have a gotta catch them all mentality. Like that's entirely possible. But I feel like kind of from the beginning, just on a low key. And if you were like really what changed it quantity wise would be discovering tarot on YouTube and discovering all the new things that had come out when I was sort of checked out of that deck creation world, and I was just, all the same decks are, I just assumed they were all the same. And when I found out there'd been this explosion of tarot, it really started for me with finding the wild unknown. And it
Mhm.
was so different than anything I'd ever seen. And then I went down the whole rabbit hole with YouTube, and my collection exploded at that point. I think I had like 35 to 50 within the first 6 months to a year, maybe. And then it grew from there. But yeah.
Mine's really, really similar. Like I just had one deck for the longest time, like, I don't know, 6, 7 years, like that, just the Legacy of the Divine is all I had. And
Yeah.
then I feel like I discovered that there were some tarot decks on Amazon. So this was a long time
Ah.
ago. And I was like, oh, look, Amazon, because I know I bought my second deck off of Amazon because I specifically went for something that I was looking for something that had a little bit more of a feminine edge to it.
Mm.
Balance out what I felt was the, more masculine energy in the personifying my decks here, the more masculine energy of Legacy of the Divine.
Yes.
And I don't know why I went on Amazon, but I just did, because this was long before I ever got onto like TarotTube. This was early 2000s ish. And
Yeah.
then I think at some point, I think my third deck was the Steampunk Tarot, which I bought in a shop. So I went to a shop, and then I realized, oh, look, there's other decks. But I
Yep.
didn't understand that the difference between the decks in terms of how they would read and how they would feel and how they would speak to me until I started watching TarotTube. And I started watching, not even just about seeing all the different decks, but hearing people have all of these different sort of experiences with all these different decks. And then that's really, for me, what I think cemented the idea of bringing in lots of different decks, because I was like, oh my goodness, they all have their own personality. They all have their
Yeah.
own energy to them. And I was just fascinated by that, because for the longest time, I'd only really experienced tarot through, those 2, 3 decks that I had. And that was it. And those were all RWS decks. And they were
Yeah.
all like essentially, in a sense, clones. They didn't really detour at all. And that was enough of a challenge for me, coming from my sort of homespun taught way of reading tarot, which wasn't really RWS. So I had to kind of like learn RWS, because all these decks I was getting in, or the few that I'd started with, I was like, oh, this actually, they all have the same system. And
Yeah.
that's not how I was taught. So I had to kind of teach myself that. And then I found TarotTube like 5 years ago now, I think, roughly around there.
Yeah.
Um, 5, 6 years ago, something like that. And then I realized that all of these different decks had all these different sort of energies and personalities, and people were using them in all these varied ways. And I just wanted to be a part of that. Same reason why I started a TarotTube channel, because then I was excited. I was like, oh, I want to talk about it too.
Oh, show things off. I want to talk about stuff. Yeah, totally.
So but similar kind of things. Like, it didn't really explode, but then I was like, oh my goodness, then it was Pokemon. I need to have them all. And then
Yeah.
that's when you start to figure out, like, okay, so I really don't need them all, because not all of them actually work for me. So
I think that's the thing. There's this cycle in the beginning where you like get a whole bunch of stuff because you're like, I want to learn all the things. And then as you do that process, because I went through the same thing with like learning how to do makeup as an adult. It's the same exact thing. Get a whole bunch of stuff and then figure out what is the color palettes that I like? What is the type of products that I like? What type of application methods do I like? And so for tarot, is the same thing. Like, you get in this big bunch of stuff because you're excited about the variety, but then doing that also teaches you about what it is that you like, what works well for you, what you're going to bond best with, what's going to speak to you on your level. Like, that's something you can only figure out. I feel like I've only been able to figure that out by getting things in hand and really working with them.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's been lots of decks I've bought, and that I'm like, this is going to be the perfect deck, right? It's going to just hit all the right notes. And then I get it, and it doesn't actually work for me in practice. But then there's the opposite, where I get a deck and I'm like, not really sure it's going to be my cup of tea. And then it turns out to be like an amazing thing for, tool for whatever practice it is I'm trying to use it for. So I
Yeah.
feel like I can't, like, I have to get them in my hands. I can't tell if it's going to work for me personally until I experience it personally. What I keep asking you, but I guess it's because you're on my channel.
So yeah.
So you wrote all the questions, but here, Lisa, let me ask you your
I
question.
like it. That's great. I'm better at answering than asking. Works for me.
So what? Now let me make it like I'm not actually reading it.
Okay.
Okay, so talking about collections, do you feel like you have any sort of like unique qualities of your collection, or I think we've talked a little bit about this with personification too,
Yeah.
because we have like
Yeah, I
certain
mean,
energies.
I feel like one of the unique things that I feel it's unique to the way that I collect, perhaps is part of it, but also how I keep decks is like I kind of I'm it's like niche upon niche upon niche. Like I
Mhm.
kind of feel like I need no more than a couple of decks in any particular kind of category in my mind. Like the decks that I use for really deep, intense, pokey work, I don't need a bunch of all of decks that all do that sort of same job for me. And
Yeah.
it's the same thing with like hug decks or affirmation decks or animal deck. It's kind of like having, I don't know, I'm trying to think of all the different categories, but yeah, I have all these different categories. And so kind of they're mental categories, I guess you could
Mhm.
say. So within that, I don't like to see a lot of repetition.
Mhm.
So that's probably a quality I would say. And then the stuff we talked about in personification, where I certainly have different flavors of things that
Yeah.
maybe I have more of than others, but that's probably the most unique quality I would say for mine is just having things that do a job.
Do you have a category that you feel the opposite about? Like you can't have enough in this category?
Oh, I don't know if I have anywhere I feel like I can't have, well, no, I don't feel like I have a category where I can't have enough. I feel like I like to have more in the workhorse category. So
Mhm.
decks that feel really flexible for client readings, that feel like sort of relatable, or that have just it's hard to really quantify what that is because I kind of learn it as I go.
Right.
But I like having a good variety there because I tend to reach for those decks for clients the most.
Mhm.
So having extra there doesn't bother me, you know? And I don't want to have a lot in any kind of very specific category. So like
Mhm.
having a lot of animal decks bugs me. Like I always like to try to keep it kind of tight.
Yeah.
Or any specific theme. I don't want to be really repetitive on specific themes. I've given myself some exceptions with like Alice,
Yeah.
but for the most part, I try to not do that too much. What about you? Is there one that you like really like to go all in on?
I feel like I am, at least right now, because I feel like it changes based on years and interests and all of that too. But like right now, I am on this hunt for anything that feels like it sits in my nerd space for me. Like I'm
Yeah.
trying to get all of those decks. There's not that many of them, to be perfectly honest, but like I need them all. So
Yeah. Like
even if they
fandom stuff.
repeat, it's okay. Like I
Yeah.
have several decks now that feel like D&D decks to me, and that's okay. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But other than that, for like I have I have a pretty big collage collection now, or I guess digital collage and analog collage. I just kind of group them all together, but I have a pretty big collection of that. So there's a lot of repeat, and I have like
Yeah.
where I buy from the same creator. So technically that's kind of a repeating energy because like I have both versions of the Moonchild, right?
Yeah.
They do feel like different decks to me, so, like, this totally validates my purchase. I do
Yeah.
not need anybody to validate my purchases, but it totally does for me.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think for the most part, yeah, I have certain things, and I think it depends on the type of work that I use it for, because, like, if it's
Yeah.
really, like, deep personal work, I just need a couple that really hit that space for me, and then I'm good. But
Yeah.
then I have some that it's more, I guess, going into that, maybe less working deck, more collecting, even though I do work with all my nerd decks, but I don't
Yeah.
use them daily. I don't use them even all that often, and I don't really use them for like specific readings. It's more of a mood. Like it's
Mhm.
I want that vibe, that it's a yeah, mood thing for me. Um,
Yeah.
but I feel like that's like right now where I'm just like I want them all. So if you know of a nerd deck that I do not currently own, people, let me know.
Drop it down below.
Drop it down below because I'm getting them all together.
Nice. I
So,
like it. That's awesome.
but that's I think that's because that's something that's very specific to me and like my like even going back to like my childhood and stuff. Like there's so many layers to that that is just not about the decks at that point. So
There's something more there for you.
there's
Yeah.
something more there for me. Like it's like
Yeah.
the supernatural deck. I'm like, yeah, it suck. Yeah. We won't even go down that rabbit hole. I still own the deck. I'm
Yeah.
still gonna keep it. Like I'm
Yeah.
not getting rid of it. I will probably still work with it too. It's just, is it gonna be my top 5? No. But it's
No.
still like for me, it's still a valuable part of my collection because what it means to me on a personal level. So I guess,
Yeah.
and maybe it's because I don't read professionally. Every deck I have, like, is for me. So I don't buy decks for other people or to use
Yeah.
for other people, you know. The only other person that I did readings for would be Ash, and Ash now has a small collection of their own. So
Yeah.
they don't use my decks anymore.
Yeah. That's the other thing is, yeah, it can be informed by who you're working with, if you're working with others or not.
Yeah.
Most of mine, I would say, are, I mean, I'll pull anything for a client, but I do tend to gravitate towards a certain grouping of decks for client work. So then not all of them end up being client work decks. But yeah, I feel like it's good to have an idea of sort of which things you'll work with more and which ones you'll work with less. But yeah, you definitely have the nerd category covered for sure.
I'm working on it.
Love it.
On it. Yeah. I've got mine. I think we talked a little bit about like we talked about organizing the data, but like how about organizing the actual decks? I use my baskets. You have your wall hanging system.
Yep.
Do you have anything else besides?
Yeah. So I technically have three. Well, if you don't count storage and purgatory, I have three main sort of ways I store my decks. I have the ones that hang on the wall, which is most of them, my mini decks and my Lenormand decks and my Marseille decks. Those live in a basket. I have Pip decks that hang on the wall, but Marseille specifically, I've only got like two of those, two or three, I think. Anyways, those and my minis all live in a basket. I like the minis in a basket kind of near my reading space because I reach for my minis a lot for bigger spreads like Celtic Cross for clients and things like that. So the mini decks are great for that. And then I have a shelf for a category of decks where it's not in any kind of like regular rotation as a tarot or an oracle deck, but it's something that kind of has a unique job, like my spread crafters. My Kipper decks live in that separate space because I got to kind of learn how to use them. Right. Decks I use for magical work primarily will live over there. So I kind of have a single bookshelf or like study decks that I've gotten for deep dive. So like my Thoth lives over there with the Thoth book. My Mythical Tarot lives over there with its book in a special pouch. And so those things kind of sit on the shelf. But I try to keep everything hanging on the wall is because then I can reach for it at any point for any purpose. That's why it hangs. But yeah, that's how mine. How about you? I know you've got your basket system and I know you've got some seasonal. Maybe you could talk us through them.
I've got my main 4 seasonal baskets, and they're like the light side of the year is on one side of my office and the dark side of the year is on the other side of my office. Like even my books are organized that way. And I love that whole shelf on one side is all stuff that's related to any work I do in the light side of the year. And then my whole other big tall bookshelf is all the stuff that I do in the dark half of the year, which here for me where I live is fall and winter. And then the other side is spring and summer. But then I also have lots of little like mini baskets and little mini collections of decks. Like I have a favorites basket. I have a little shelf with all of my collage decks, digital and analog. Those are all together on a shelf. I have a basket of like spooky season decks. I have a shelf of all my nerd stuff. So I have like little mini collections in my collection, like my collection.
Yeah. I kind of try to do that with my wall racks a little bit, but it always ends up getting messed up. But I always have good intentions. And whenever I clean it up, I do that where I already have my tarot and my oracle separated on different racks, but on my tarot racks, I'll like group my animal ones together. I'll group my peoply decks together, my mythical or mythological decks together, that kind of thing. But they're not seasonal at all. My decks are not. I've got a few decks I use seasonally, but mostly it's helter skelter, and it's just more by theme.
Yeah. I use my seasonal decks outside of their season. It's just the seasonal, and I think it's just because I've done it for so long, that seasonal association that I have with those particular decks it's more of a category, a grouping system. If I know I want to go get the Tarot of the She, I know it's in my summer basket. That doesn't mean that I don't use it the rest of the year. It's just that it lives, and I know exactly where it is because it's in that basket with anything else that feels like it sits in that sort of energy. And so it's not that I don't use them outside of the season, but I do have certain decks that I do only use seasonally, and then they become like special occasion things.
Yeah, I actually have a whole rack. My hardest to reach rack is where I put decks that I really only use in their season. So like I have a very small amount of things. My Seasons of the Witch oracles live up there, and my like specifically Halloween decks or Yule decks, that kind of thing. Those live there. But and that's because I know I don't need them out in my regular like rotation. So I put that in my most awkward rack so that like it's only reaching for that like in October or whatever. So yeah.
So that's interesting. Is your specific season only decks Halloween and Yule?
I think so.
I
I
think
think
mine
well,
are
other
too.
than Seasons of the Witch, because Seasons of the Witch, I've got like Beltane and
Well, yeah. Okay, so outside of
all
them,
those.
because I have those too, but the
I
other
think outside of them, it's
season
just
specific,
Yule
yeah,
and Samhain. Yeah.
same.
Yeah.
I'd be curious if anybody else, because I know a lot of people who have Halloween decks and have Yule
Yeah.
decks that they only use during
Yeah.
that season. So I'd be curious to know if anybody has a season, any other
Other than
season or special occasion that you keep decks for other than those.
yeah.
I've never
Yeah,
heard
I'd
of
be
another one.
curious about that. Yeah, I think the same. I think I've heard Yule and Samhain, and mostly Samhain or Halloween
Yeah.
is when I think we hear the most people having a specific, these are my Halloween decks.
These are
That's
my
why it's
Halloween
totally so
decks.
fun. I
Why do
can't
we
wait to
not
pull them
get
out.
excited about any other season? It's just
It's
like
just
we
Halloween
all
season.
wait for October to roll around, I guess in
Yep.
our hemisphere, for October
Yeah.
to roll around so we can like I feel like October, November, and December have the most potent energy for like thematic decks for me.
Yeah.
Like
Definitely for me too.
so they kind of have their own little like collection within my larger collection because I have
Yep.
decks that I definitely use during those times.
Yep, for sure.
Something about those last 3 months of the year, it's just I mean, there's a lot, I guess, crammed in, like, holiday-wise and, wheel of the year wise, all crammed into that short 3-month period, so maybe that's what it is, or I just like that seasonal energy. Like, summer can suck it, as I said many, many times, like, I'm
Yeah.
not a summer person. So, I get
Yep.
real excited for fall to roll around.
Yep.
Like,
Love it. I love
let's
fall.
go. I'm done with the summer. At your number, and definitely my number, I think we would be considered to have large collections.
I mean,
Not,
I would definitely call it large.
not as large as some people we know,
No,
but,
but large.
but
Yes.
large. It's
Yeah,
on the larger scale of things.
for sure.
So, do you think that having a larger collection has impacted your relationship with your decks, and for positive or negative in any sort of way?
Yeah, I think there's ups, there's positives and there's negatives. I think the biggest con is just that when you have a lot of decks, it's hard to have that really deep, intimate relationship with just one that I think is just wholly unique to having just a couple decks at a time, like that you own.
Mhm.
When I was like the first few years in tarot, I really just had the one or two that I worked with, and that was it. And I think there's something really special about that relationship. But having a lot has informed my practice because it's like I've learned from every single deck I've worked with. I've been exposed to so many different perspectives on the tarot.
Mhm.
I don't know that I could replace that experience with any other experience. Like,
Yeah.
I suppose you could get the same experience if you saw many, many, many different tarot readers and got readings from many, many different tarot readers.
Mhm.
But I feel like this is definitely more affordable. And also there's only so many questions I can ask, but in just doing walkthroughs or like flipping through the cards and saying, oh, this is how this artist interpreted the Four of Pentacles. That's so interesting. Or this
Mhm.
is how this person sees the Two of Swords or the Three of Swords. That has completely dramatically, exponentially increased my tarot vocabulary over the years, just working with so many different perspectives. I wouldn't trade that experience for anything.
Same, same.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have quite a few decks and I don't work with all of them. So I can definitely see that there are decks that I have really special relationships with or more special relationships with than others. So I think in that way there are some decks that I just like I haven't really given the time and attention that it probably deserves or that I should. Not that I
Yeah.
won't, right? Like it's not going
Yeah.
anywhere. There's no hurry to it. That's the thing I try to
Yeah.
remind myself. Like if I bring a deck in, I don't have to use it right this 5 minutes. It is okay
No.
for me to set it aside and let it just chill and hang out until I'm ready for it. But having so many decks because I'm such a moody reader. Like I want whatever deck I pick to either like mirror back my mood or put me in a different mood.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
a large collection with such those broad personalities, right? All the different
Yeah.
energies and personalities, like to have that many different voices and perspectives to be able to pull in. I can guarantee you that anything that I question, feeling, mood, whatever that I could possibly come up with, I will have a deck somewhere in my collection that is going to give me what I need in that moment. And
Yeah.
that's kind of a neat feeling that I think part of it is also going back to when I did only have the one deck. That first deck, I never felt personally connected to that deck. So I didn't have the same experiences with that deck when I just had the one. I didn't have the same readings that I do now when I can pick a deck that 100% resonates with what it is that I'm needing at the moment, or, experiencing or whatever, whether it's mirroring it back to me or I'm just like need to shift and like,
Yeah.
don't be me right now, be what I should be, not what I am.
Yeah. I love
But
that.
like having that many to choose from means that I have that like huge well of different, energies and experiences to tap into, which is so cool. But and also like,
Yeah.
there's so many different perspectives represented in all these different decks. And some of
Yeah.
them are totally different systems. So
Yeah, and that's the other thing you get to learn from is these different structures and the ways of looking at the tarot. I remember when Witch's Wisdom Tarot came out and they reversed the major arcana. I thought
mhm,
that was fascinating. It was really interesting to think of unpacking as a
mhm,
method of or moving towards the Fool, which is, now that I'm thinking about it, has got a Kabbalistic kind of reference too. If you think about
mhm.
moving closer up to going up the tree as
Yeah,
opposed to down the tree, which is the way that we normally look at it.
right.
It's just interesting to be exposed to those different things for sure.
Mhm.
I like that you said that you didn't necessarily have that super special relationship when you only had one deck, because that's something I forget that is not, it's not a guarantee. Having one deck is not a guarantee, or having just a couple that you're going to bond really well with the ones that you have. Sometimes the opposite is true. And I think it's good that you mentioned that, because it can be a stereotype that gets carried forward, like the soul deck, where people are like, what if I never find my soul deck? It's like, maybe that's not a thing for you. Maybe that's not a part of your experience with tarot. Maybe there isn't that one that you're going to feel super bonded to in an inexplainable way. And so
Mm.
I think talking about the fact that it wasn't like that for you is really helpful, because then people see that, oh yeah, there's different
Yeah.
ways.
It wasn't the second deck I bought wasn't that either. I
Hmm.
don't think it was until I bought the Steampunk Tarot, and I'm not like, I do have like a special bond with that deck, but I think also because it like represents a specific time in my life. Like I was in my
Yeah.
20s when I got it. So like
Yeah.
I was in that vibe at the time anyway. And I was so excited when I found that deck because I was like, it actually reflected something that I was interested in anyway, a sort of a theme or a vibe and energy that spoke to me outside of the tarot. So it wasn't
Hmm.
until I got that deck that I started to really start to make some personal connections to a deck. And I wouldn't even consider that now. Like, I don't consider that my soul deck. It's not like,
Yeah.
the end all be all deck. I will never get rid of it because it does have a very special place. But it was the first deck that kind of showed me that, oh, you can have a personal relationship with a deck in a sense. And you can,
Yeah.
different decks have different meanings and different energies. And that was something that I didn't even get to experience until I bought my third deck. It was 3 decks in until I even found it. And I don't think I found like decks that really started to really resonate with me until, like, if I'm being honest, until I found indie decks.
Yeah.
I mean, just to, not, I love mass market decks, but I think it was when I started finding indie creators that some of them, for the most part, they created art in the similar way that I did. That's where I started really finding a personal connection.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. I feel like, yeah, I started experiencing my yeah, I think I had something kind of similar. I really bonded to some of the mass market decks for sure.
Mhm.
But I think the interesting thing about indie is that there was more, at least initially, there was a lot more ingenuity and like uniqueness to the way indie decks were coming out. Like they were,
Yeah.
because of course indie deck creators are often trying to solve a problem. Like they're trying to create something that doesn't exist. That's the
Mhm.
whole reason to independently publish, is because it's not out there. It's not out there the way that you envision it. So you want to create
You and I are
it.
both
So,
doing that. The
yeah,
decks we're
exactly.
making are the decks that don't exist in the world that we want.
That we want for ourselves. We want them to be in the world. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing about indie that tends to, I think, break us out of our ruts when it comes to tarot, is they just
Mhm.
give us a new way to look at it. And that's changed now we're seeing a lot of ingenuity in the mass market as well, but that wasn't the case for a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that.
And a lot of indie decks are now being picked up by mass market, which is fantastic because it makes them so much more available to people.
Yeah.
But yeah, and there are mass market decks like my Green Witch Tarot. That is a mass market deck. That's one you could pry out of my cold dead hands. I will never get rid of that deck.
Yep.
But, there are there's more to it than just that. But when I started looking at indie art and seeing the way that people were interpreting the tarot different too, because when you step outside of mass market, at least back in the day, it's a little bit more acceptable now, but back in the day, when you stepped outside of mass market, you could view the tarot through a different lens. You could express that Three of Swords in another way, and
Yeah.
nobody would get mad about it.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I think that's what really exploded tarot in a lot of ways is the unique diversity of decks out there. And that's something else too, is that with indie decks getting picked up for mass market, that's in a really cool and powerful way has really started to change the landscape of what we now expect from the mass market deck, for good or for bad. Like, we're seeing higher quality, and a lot of times we're seeing mass market publishers play with different kinds of card stock. We're seeing different kinds of illustration styles, or even really risky decks that I think would be risky for a mass market publisher, right? That come out that have a really, unique point of view. And that then changes the scope of what could be a mass market deck, which then it's such a multifaceted thing that's really cool to see as tarot evolves, for sure.
Yeah. I love it. And there's so much variety now that, and I know there's a discussion around, saturation. Absolutely. That's a valid point. But on the flip side of that, like, it's like having 900 different flavors of soda. It's still soda, but like, if I want vanilla today, or maybe I want cherry, like, I think that's great to have all the different varieties, because there's going to be something for everybody.
Well, it's the same with fashion, right? If you think about it, like, everybody was wearing earth tones and like Muslim or whatever. I don't know, I'm making that up, but like, it was all like the same.
I'm not fashion savvy.
Yeah, me either. But like, if you could make the same argument for clothes and say, well, you only need one pair of pants, and you need one shirt, and you need, your basics, your undergarments, and you're done. You need outerwear. But of course, people love fashion because it's a way to express themselves and their energy and their personality. And it's the same thing for any tool or any deck or whatever. It's opportunities to engage with a different way of looking at it or being with it. And because, like, to your point, the variety means that more people can find things that work for them, because I'm sure there were plenty of people that did not feel like the decks that used to be commonly available were for them or worked for them or represented them in any way, shape, or form. And this variety and this mainstreaming and even saturation of tarot creates more opportunity for people to find, like you said, their perfect tool, their perfect deck, or many of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of them that work for you.
Yeah.
Like, also having exposure to, different sorts of ideas through different decks that maybe I wouldn't normally have thought about before, or like dove into, or like you were talking about, like Kabbalah and stuff like that. I probably wouldn't have done any deep work into that had it not been for, getting the Thoth and working through that.
Yeah.
So I think the other good thing about having, a larger collection, or just having access, like, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to own a ton of decks, but just having access to this huge variety of decks. Also, I think for a lot of us, it gives us access points into other realms of study too.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe dives into something different or adds a layer to it, moons or runes or whatever it is. And then
goddesses, or Arthurian legend, or fairy tales and myths, world stories, famous figures. I don't know. There's so many places doors it can unlock. It's like books, right?
Yeah,
a book is like a door to another
world. So
many
decks that have taken me down rabbit holes that I would have never gone down. And it doesn't mean I stay in that rabbit hole. I'm like, I'm squirrel with it. I'm like, ooh, that's cool. Let me do that for a little bit, back out, and now I'm over here doing this. But there's so many things that I would have never learned or experienced had it not been something I saw in a tarot deck.
Yeah. I mean, actually, the Tao Oracle was one of my very first, maybe my first Oracle deck that I used with any regularity. And I didn't even know about the I Ching until that deck. That deck exposed me to the I Ching. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's concepts and ideas and all sorts of things that a deck can introduce you to. Yeah, it's one of the things that we don't talk about enough, I think, is that sometimes we think of how we have an interest and then we go seek a deck that matches that interest or whatever. That's a thing that's happening now.
For sure.
But the reverse is true, absolutely, where you encounter something that's really beautiful in tarot or an oracle, and it opens up a door of interest to a whole new culture or world or system. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, maybe something that you've just never been exposed to before, or never really thought to explore on that deeper level.
Yep.
It's really cool. There's a huge chunk of my collection that I would say I have learned something new from. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
I deep dive into it all, but I'm like, "Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that." It's not really intentional, but it does, I think, happen the more you're exposed to these things. It's like when you read a bunch of books, right?
Yeah.
If you wanna be a good writer, be a good reader.
Yeah.
The same applies to tarot. Like,
Yeah.
having a variety of decks, or at least being able to, not that you necessarily have to have them or read with a bunch of variety of decks, but I think that just having access and being able to see them too just helps you, like watching tarot tube videos, like
Being exposed. Yeah.
being exposed is good. Like,
Yeah.
and sometimes you'll look at it and go, yeah, that's not for me. Not cool, you know that too. So like,
Yeah, that's why I like watching walkthroughs. I say it over and over again, but I
mhm,
love watching lengthy walkthroughs because I like hearing people's perspectives on the image or the symbols on the card, and like hearing different takes on it, because people don't interpret the symbology the same way. They don't interpret the scene the same way. And
mhm,
just that can be really great. It's why it's fun sometimes to watch people do pick a card readings, or do readings for the collective, or do live stream readings or whatever, because you get to like see in real time sort of how that person interacts with that image and then interprets it in the language of the tarot. And that's a whole learning experience as well. It's
mhm.
like just exposing yourself to different ideas and different perspectives. I'm going to say I'm like a broken record, but like that's the thing for me.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you don't have to own the decks. That's the other thing
No.
too, is like you don't, like it is in Pokemon. Like we don't have to catch them all.
No, we
There's
don't.
lots of videos that I watch, or I'll just look up or whatever. Like it does, because YouTube is my main platform, it does tend to be videos for me, but even on Instagram or whatever, it's like thumbing through a magazine and looking at the art a lot of times. Sometimes I don't like, I just want to see the art. I don't need to have the deck. I don't need to own the deck. I don't
Yeah.
need to read with the deck. I just want to see it. I just want to
Yeah.
see what that 78 pieces of art, or 55, or whatever it is in the Oracle. I just want to see those images. And like you're saying, like walkthroughs is great when I can find a walkthrough and then hear someone's perspective on it, or they read a little from the guidebook or whatever. But that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that I necessarily need to own it, but I can still experience it like through osmosis, right?
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
So I think that's important to like just kind of note. Like we're not here saying everybody needs to buy all the decks and have massive collections.
No. But this is what we get out of it, right?
This
This is
is
like
what
our
we get out of
experience.
it.
Yeah.
Although there are times, and I was gonna ask you if you ever felt this way, but there are times when I see people with this like really curated collection of decks, this like so niche, and like, I don't know, just this like little vignette of who they are as a person. And I'm like, oh, I kind of want that.
Yeah.
I
It's
think
kind of
I
like
want that. My fantasy self wants that.
my fantasy self is a minimalist. My actual self is not.
Yes,
And so
same.
it's like, yeah, I do the same thing. I'm like, gosh, it would be so nice. And sometimes I even reminisce about what it was like when I only had a handful of decks and
Mhm,
how that was really simple. But my practice was totally different then. Like
mhm,
the time when I had only a few decks, it was more important to me to get comfortable with reading in the first place and making those associations and like
right.
being really comfortable than it was for me to explore the layers that I get to explore now with multiple. And so it's kind of like I see it almost like a waterfall, I guess, in a way. It started with like a drop and then more drops. And then now it's like rushing over the rocks and like it's a whole thing, but I can't really take it back to that droplet stage. You know what I mean? I'm not there anymore.
Either.
Yeah.
I don't think I could. I think at this point in my practice, and because of the way that I work with tarot, I think if I just had like a handful of decks, or like even just half the size of a collection I have now, I think I would be like looking for things. And then they wouldn't
Yeah.
be there, because I'm so used to being able to work with such specific energies that I think now if I took that out of my practice, I mean, yes, I could adjust, right? This is all
Yeah.
like this is all
It's
like
all
perspective,
theoretical.
right?
Yeah.
But I think I would miss it at this point. But I
Yeah.
do sometimes romanticize that idea of just having that very small curated collection that reflects me. But on the
Yeah.
flip side of that, like today is not necessarily me tomorrow. So what I'm
Yeah.
feeling today for a deck might not be what I feel tomorrow. And that's my tripping up point.
Yeah.
But maybe it's just because I've gotten used to it.
You know what though? You can do that in small ways without changing your collection at all. I was just thinking of a YouTuber I watch who sometimes does fashion stuff. She's mostly a makeup YouTuber, Hannah Louise Pasta, and I talked about her before, but
Mhm.
she does this thing interestingly with fashion where she she basically gives herself one of those curated collections of fashion pieces, of clothing pieces. She goes to her closet and she's like, I'm going to work with a capsule collection for my own stuff. And so
Mhm.
she selects a specific color palette, for example, like I'm going to have just earth tones and like linens and like muslins and like blacks, and then
Mhm.
puts that in her closet and puts everything else, packs it up in boxes and puts it away. So in theory, you could create that. If you wanted to ever experiment with that, you could be like, you know what, for the next 3 months, I'm going to curate a very special little
Mhm.
collection for myself and work with just those and see what I get from that experience and how versatile those things could be. And you
Yeah.
can do that even though you have a lot, which I think is really interesting. Like you can still give yourself the same experience.
Well, I feel like I kind of do that with my monthly medicine practice, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't put everything else away though, so I do have other decks to get into. I've never actually thought to like just actually not touch anything else, just
Yeah.
to use the decks, but I do like for my the decks that I use for my monthly medicine, that's a very small curated collection that is for that month, for that practice, and it totally
Yes.
aligns with that theme and all of that. So, I guess I do get to experience that on a monthly basis because
Yeah.
I work with that energy. But then I also have like for my the readings that I do, like my moon readings and stuff like that, I do have a 10 like small collection of decks that I tend to just use those for, that it's not like really intentional, just kind of happen. Those decks
Yeah.
work really well. I like using them for that. So like now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, I do actually do that. I just do it
That's
within
awesome.
confines or within the yeah, within the confines of the collection that I have. Confines is the
Yeah.
wrong word, but you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Yeah. I
So,
love
like,
that.
even though I have a large collection, I do feel like I get to niche down quite often, actually.
Yeah.
So,
That's
which is
awesome.
fun. Also, do you ever get deck paralysis where you're like, I do not know what to pick? Like,
Yeah, the funny thing is that's how I know that my collection's gotten too big. So it's kind of funny. That's sort of my my point,
mhm,
right? The point that I hit is like, okay, I'm looking at all of my decks and all I'm seeing is like noise. And
mhm,
when it starts to feel like noise, I'm like, there's too much. And that's usually when I'll go through a cycle of this or that or declutters, because I'll be like, you know what? That's why I think my collection sort of stabilized at that 250 point and never quite
yeah,
rose, because it's like a visual thing. It's all on my walls too. So I can see, I look up and I'm like, nope, a little too much, a little too much. It's just starting to become, I can't focus. I can't, it's just beyond that point of what I can contain within my mind for a variety. It's like
mhm,
it moves from variety to, I describe it as clutter, but it's not like clutter exactly, but it's that noise that it
yeah,
becomes.
as
So yeah,
noise
that's what
is a good
happens.
word. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
I definitely get deck paralysis, but that to me isn't an indication that my collection's too big. I just use my Oracle decks to help me pick a deck. Like
Yeah.
I cheat it. I'm like,
That's
I
a great
don't
way
know
to
what
do
to
it.
pick today, so like let me pick an Oracle because my Oracle collection is much smaller. It's
Yeah.
like less than half the size of my tarot collection.
Same. Yeah.
So that's much more, in a sense, curated. So when I start to feel that kind of paralysis, I'll choose an oracle and then let that choose the tarot. But I do sometimes get the deck overwhelm, just like there's too many. But usually, what I'll do at that point is actually just clean. I've
Mhm.
noticed for me, it's actually not that I have too many decks, and that's probably a terrible thing to say, but it's not that I have too many decks, it's that I've let them kind of get in disarray.
Yes, that too. For sure, that
So
too.
it's and I that's the thing that I've really discovered over the last couple of years, and because I used to go into the binge and purge cycle when that happened.
Yeah.
And then I started to realize it's not about the number of decks, it's about the fact that I've let things become chaotic,
Disorganized. Yeah.
disorganized. Stuff's in the wrong basket, it's not on the right shelves. I'm kinda
And then
OCD
it's
when it comes to that. And if
yeah.
I will just stop when I get to that point and I start feeling that way and just clean, like
Mhm.
clean my crap up, right? If I just
Yeah.
clean up my office and
Yep.
reset things, because sometimes I get like you know how it is, you get decks coming in and you're just like, oh, I'm gonna shove it over here because I don't have time to deal with that right in this five
Yes,
minutes.
exactly.
So like that happens. I do that with books. Sitting next to my desk is like a huge pile of journaling stuff that I've bought and 4 tarot decks that have come in. And they're just sitting here on the
Yeah.
floor. And
Yep.
it's causing me anxiety. But that
Time to clean.
that doesn't mean that like those decks need to go. And I've noticed
No.
that about myself, is that that used to be the knee jerk reaction. Stuff is untidy, therefore I must like declutter. And it's not that I need to declutter. I need to clean. Like,
yeah.
nice.
I'm sure that happens to me too, but my first step when I'm doing declutter is to get everything organized first and then declutter. So then it sort of sorts itself out as I go through.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Like, okay, I put everything up. I've got everything in its right place. Does it still look like noise? Okay, then deal with it. But yeah, I have a wheel. Like I use a wheel of names picker. Like I put my entire collection list into a wheel, and then I'll spin it. Like if I just want a random, like I just want to get outside of my head and not overthink what deck I'm going to use, I'll do that.
That's such a great idea.
Yeah, I love that.
Kind of like gamifying your collection too. I love it.
I did it for a long time. I used to do the wheel almost exclusively for my weekly picks. I'd be like, wheel for the tarot, wheel for the oracle. What am I working with this week? And I would just work with those. And it was fun. Yeah.
Man, I mean, I could do that on occasion, but I don't think I could do that for every time.
No, I don't think the way you pair decks that would work.
No, because
you can pick the oracle or the tarot and then just pull its family or its pairs with it,
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might. We all know my stuff's got a matchy. It's just the way it works.
Yep.
Otherwise, my brain can't focus, and I'm just.
That's right.
It's like when my table isn't set right, which I know everybody thinks is like just me being the aesthetic thing. No, it's actually kind of an anxiety OCD thing too. Like it needs to look right, or I can focus on what it is I'm supposed to be focusing on. That has nothing to do with deck collections.
That's okay.
Do you have any advice for like somebody who's new to tarot? Like seeing these people with large collections?
I have two sort of conflicting pieces of information that are going to contradict one another. The first is that obviously, like don't necessarily assume that just because the people on social media have these huge collections that that's what's common or normal at all. I don't think it is. I think this is a combination effect of like making content around decks and like enjoying doing that, and also reviewing decks that sort of amasses a slightly different feeling around having a lot of decks and other things. So like be aware that that's not a reflection at all of what's common or average at all. I think the average is like a handful of decks.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
But then the other piece of advice is that if you find yourself going into this big, deep pit, pit's is such a negative word. If you find yourself going down sort of the water slide of excitement over tarot, and you're like acquiring things along the way and you end up amassing a lot in the beginning, try not to get caught up in like a shame cycle around that, because that's part of, I've done the same thing with every hobby I've ever been into. Makeup, knitting, crocheting, doesn't matter what it is. Journaling, I acquire a whole bunch of stuff and then I figure out what works for me. And I'm not saying that that's like the best way to go about it, but I feel like it's fairly common when you're learning something new or you're exposing yourself to something new to go really all in with it so that you can figure out what you do and don't like. So if you've ended up in that water slide of lots and lots of decks, that just to like recognize that that was part of your story and your experience, and you don't have to stay there if you don't like it. There's lots and lots of ways to rehome things. But yeah, just maybe give yourself some time to like enjoy that you've done that, and rather than feel guilty or get stuck in a shame cycle about it.
Yeah, I think that's where the binge and purge starts coming up for a lot of people, is when we start slipping into that shame cycle.
Yeah.
And it's totally natural. Like I don't know anybody I guess I should preface, anybody with a tarot channel, because I don't know a ton of what people do outside of the people that we see visually and, are exposed to through social media. But I don't know anybody that hasn't at some point or another gone through that cycle. So I think it's perfectly normal too. Like it doesn't make you're not bad. It's not wrong. Like it's just okay. And if you don't experience that at all, that's okay too. Like that's not a bad thing either.
There's no right or wrong way to be into this. And like, there's no hierarchy of like people who have lots and lots of decks are somehow better readers or more experienced or whatever. It's just people who like to have lots and lots of decks. Like that's literally all you can tell about somebody by the fact that they have a lot of decks, is that they just have a lot of decks. Yeah. You can't tell anything about their financial situation or like what they're into or how deep they go or don't go with their decks. And I think there's often a false equivalency between having a lot of decks and having no depth to your practice, which is a problematic assumption that people make. But like, that's not the case. You really can't know. That's the thing. You're not in that person's living room or you're in their bedroom and like seeing how they're working with their decks. So just like leave the assumptions at the door, maybe.
I think I mentioned that in a video recently too. Like what you see, and I've mentioned it in many videos, what you see on social media is only a small piece or portion of what actually happens for most of us, because we don't put our entire lives on, on camera. So like what you see isn't always necessarily what's always going on, but
Yeah, there's more going on.
there's usually more going on. And there are some people who have like 2 or 3 decks and barely use them. Like there's the
Yeah.
opposite is true too.
Yep.
So, and there's also no magic number. I think whatever constitutes a collection for you personally, and whether that has a number or not, that's totally up to you. Like I don't really have a number. I have, well, okay, so I want to hit the 500 just because I'm like, it's like a quest. Everything I do in my life is like a freaking video.
Gamify your life.
Yep. I gamify my life, and I want to hit that 500 mark. It's like getting the max level in a video game, right?
Yeah.
Just to say I did it just because. Will I stay there forever? Who knows? Will I go beyond it? Maybe. I don't know. Don't really care. It'll work itself out.
Time will tell. Yeah.
Time will tell. But it is like, for me personally, it's more of like a space thing. When my decks like literally start spilling out into like intrusive areas of my life or in my house, then that's a problem for me. But it isn't a number for me. I only know my number because I get asked so often what my number is. Otherwise, I do not care what it is. But now it's the thing. 500. That's the thing. Yeah. That's my quest. Like I'm gonna hit it at some point.
Love that.
But yeah, there's not a magic number. It's just whatever works for you and your use in your collection and your budget and all of that kind of good stuff.
Exactly.
There's no tarot police, right?
Nope. Do what you want. Do what you like. Do what makes you happy.
You be you. So next month we're going to be on your channel.
Yes.
And what are we talking about?
Next month on my channel, we'll be talking about shadow work in our practice, what that looks like.
That's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
It'll be October. It's like the right month for it, you know?
It's like the right month for it. And like I have feels around shadow work, so that's going to be an interesting conversation. I'm
looking a little spicy. We'll have to see. Yep, I have feelings about it too.
Yeah.
Yep, that'll be fun.
So, alrighty. Well, I think we'll wrap it up. And if y'all have any questions for us, drop them in the comments. We are always happy to respond. And we'll see you guys next month over on Lisa's channel for more tarot and practice.
We'll talk to you then.
All right. Bye.
Bye.